The police found a tunnel this morning in the house of an elderly woman in Cleveland, setting off a chain of events that would horrify even the most seasoned officers. It all began with an anonymous tip that something strange was happening at her residence. When the officers arrived, the elderly woman, identified only as Margaret, opened the door. Her frail hands trembled as she clutched the edges of her shawl, and her eyes darted nervously. She tried to deter them, muttering something about her home being just an old house with secrets better left alone. Her unease only aroused the officers' suspicion. They decided to conduct a thorough search. Inside her bedroom, they noticed something peculiar. The floor near her bed seemed uneven, the wooden planks not fitting quite right, as if they'd been recently tampered with. One officer, Officer Hernandez, moved the bed aside, revealing an inconspicuous rug. As he pulled it away, everyone froze. A small, crudely cut entrance lay beneath. The opening was dark, with a musty, earthy scent wafting out. Margaret immediately broke down, sobbing and pleading with them not to go down. "You don't understand," she cried, her voice breaking. "You'll wake them, you'll make it worse." Her cryptic words only steeled their resolve. Ignoring her desperate screams, they descended the makeshift wooden ladder into the tunnel. The narrow passage was suffocating, the air thick and damp. Roots twisted through the soil like skeletal hands, and symbols scrawled in dark red what appeared to be blood lined the walls. Officer Hernandez's flashlight trembled slightly as he illuminated these eerie marks, some resembling ancient runes, others depicting grotesque, humanoid figures. As they progressed, the strangeness intensified. Scattered along the ground were artifacts of what seemed like different lives: rusty jewelry, faded photographs, torn clothing, old toys, and bundles of decaying currency. Each object seemed to whisper stories of forgotten sorrow, but none of it prepared them for what lay at the end. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, dimly lit by an unnatural, flickering glow that seemed to emanate from no discernible source. At the center of the room stood a stone altar, crusted with what looked like dried blood. Around it were wax figures of children, eerily lifelike, each holding an objected doll, a teddy bear, or a wilted flower. Then they saw it, the most shocking discovery. A small pile of bones, clearly human, lay carefully arranged near the altar. Skulls, some disturbingly small, were stacked like a macabre totem. Officer Jenkins turned pale and stumbled back, whispering, These are children." Margaret's voice echoed down the tunnel as she screamed, "It wasn't me. I only did what they asked. They said they'd keep me alive." Her cries were no longer frantic, but resigned, as though she had carried this secret for too long. The officers arrested Margaret on the spot. As they dragged her away, she began muttering incoherently about the Watchers and the pact she made to stay alive. She insisted the tunnel wasn't hers, that it was there long before she moved in decades ago, and she had simply been maintaining the rituals to keep whatever lived down there appeased. Investigators sealed off the house and brought in forensic experts. Initial examinations suggested the tunnel and its macabre contents had existed for over a century. Some of the remains dated back to the late 1800s. As the news broke, rumors spread across Cleveland about the house's sinister history. Some claimed it was once owned by a reclusive cult, while others believed the tunnel was a gateway to something far more terrifying. Margaret's words lingered in everyone's minds. They said they'd keep me alive. Even after her arrest, officers reported strange occurrences around the property, equipment failing without explanation, shadows moving where there should be none, and a chilling feeling that someone or something was still watching. The house was eventually demolished, but to this day, no one dares to build on the land. Locals say that on quiet nights, faint whispers can still be heard, calling from where the tunnel once lay, beckoning those curious enough to listen. Despite the house's demolition, the story of the tunnel and its horrors refused to fade from public consciousness. Margaret, now awaiting trial, was a constant source of intrigue. She had stopped eating and barely spoke, muttering cryptic phrases when questioned by investigators. The phrases seemed nonsensical at first, fragments about keeping the Watchers at bay, and the toll being paid. But then, during one of her more lucid moments, she made a chilling revelation. "They don't like the light," she whispered to the investigator. "That's why I stayed in the shadows. That's why I had to feed them." Authorities dismissed her words as the ramblings of a disturbed mind, but something about her hollow gaze and the desperation in her voice unsettled even the most hardened interrogators. They began to comb through her background, trying to piece together her life before the discovery. Margaret's past was as puzzling as the tunnel itself. Records showed she had moved into the house over 50 years ago, inheriting it from an aunt who had died under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors remembered her as a recluse, rarely seen outside except at night. Those who interacted with her described a woman haunted, often mumbling to herself about keeping them happy. Yet no one ever suspected anything truly sinister. Meanwhile, the forensic investigation into the artifacts and remains found in the tunnel uncovered more disturbing details. Many of the bones belonged to children who had gone missing over the course of a century. But what baffled scientists was the condition of the remains. Some appeared to be decades old, while others seemed far more recent, as if the tunnel had claimed victims even after Margaret had supposedly become too frail to leave her home. Then there were the symbols. Linguists and historians identified them, a mix of ancient languages, some from forgotten pagan traditions, others entirely unknown. One recurring symbol, a crude depiction of an eye surrounded by radiating lines, appeared to represent some kind of entity or force. Its presence in the tunnel's carvings hinted at a being that demanded offerings. In the weeks following Margaret's arrest, strange reports began to emerge from the neighborhood. Residents claimed to hear faint, rhythmic knocking sounds at night, as if something were trying to dig its way out. Pets started disappearing, and a few people reported vivid nightmares involving shadowy figures with glowing eyes. A team of paranormal investigators, drawn to the infamous site, conducted a nighttime investigation near the sealed-off property. Armed with thermal cameras and audio equipment, they ventured as close as they could to where the tunnel had once been. At first, their recordings captured only ambient noise, but as the night deepened, the equipment picked up strange whispers. When played back, the whispers formed a chilling phrase: "We are not buried, we are waiting." One of the investigators, a skeptic named Derek, laughed it off as a hoax. But the next day, he vanished without a trace, his car found abandoned near the demolition site. His colleagues, shaken by his disappearance, reviewed their footage again. In the final moments of their recording, a faint figure, tall, gaunt, and with eyes that seemed to burn, could be seen standing at the edge of the frame before vanishing into the darkness. Margaret's trial, originally scheduled for the following month, was postponed indefinitely when she was found dead in her cell. The cause of death was ruled as cardiac arrest, but the coroner noted an odd detail: her expression in death was one of sheer terror. Carved into the wall of her cell was the same eye symbol from the tunnel, etched with what seemed to be her fingernails. The land where the house once stood is now overgrown, nature reclaiming the space. No one dares step foot on it. Those who pass by swear they can feel eyes watching them from the shadows, and children in the area whisper tales of a shadow man who roams the neighborhood, looking for those who stray too close. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved. Was Margaret a victim of forces beyond her understanding, or was she the mastermind of unspeakable rituals? One thing is certain: whatever happened in that tunnel left a mark on the town that will never fade. And somewhere beneath the earth, the Watchers wait.